The morning sunlight was just beginning to filter through the tall windows of the Westfield Concert Hall as Eleanor Williams moved quietly between the rows of empty seats. The soft swoosh of her broom against the polished floor was the only sound in the cavernous room, a gentle rhythm she had grown accustomed to over 15 years of early mornings. Eleanor liked this time best, before the musicians arrived, before the bustle of the day began, when she could imagine the music that would soon fill this space. At 58, she moved with purpose, her hands strong and sure from years of hard work, her dark eyes missing nothing that needed attention. The grand piano stood center stage, its lid propped open like a black wing catching the soft light. Eleanor always saved it for last, treating the instrument with a reverence that went beyond her job description. She would dust each curve with care, polish the gleaming surface until she could see her reflection, making sure no fingerprints remained from yesterday's performances. This Tuesday was supposed to be like any other. But as Eleanor approached the stage with her cleaning cart, she noticed something unusual. The backstage door opened earlier than normal, and a man walked out carrying a leather portfolio. She recognized him immediately, Victor Hartman, the famous pianist whose poster hung in the lobby announcing tonight's sold-out performance. His silver-streaked dark hair and expensive suit made him look every bit the celebrity musician featured in classical music magazines. Eleanor quickly moved to the side of the hall, trying to make herself invisible as she always did when important people entered. She wasn't supposed to be seen, just make everything perfect and disappear before anyone important arrived. But the concert hall was her workplace and she had tasks to finish. "I need privacy," Victor called out to no one in particular, his voice echoing through the empty hall. He hadn't noticed Eleanor yet as he settled at the piano bench and began arranging his sheet music. Eleanor hesitated, her cart half hidden in the shadows of the side aisle. She should leave, come back later to finish. But Mr. Reynolds, the hall manager, had been clear that everything needed to be spotless by 9, and it was already past 7. The morning crew had called in short, leaving her with twice the usual work. She decided to continue cleaning the back rows as quietly as possible. With any luck, once the pianist began practicing, the music would cover the soft sounds of her work. Victor Hartman stretched his fingers and began to play, the complex notes of Rachmaninoff filling the space. Eleanor's hands slowed as she listened. Though she had no formal music education, years of cleaning concert halls had given her an ear for quality. And this man played beautifully. For 20 minutes, she worked in peaceful coexistence with the distant music, gradually making her way around the outer edge of the hall. But then the music suddenly stopped, replaced by a frustrated groan and the harsh sound of piano keys being struck discordantly. "It's not right," Victor muttered to himself, loud enough for his voice to carry through the quiet hall. "It's still not right." He tried the passage again, his fingers moving in a blur across the keys, but stopped abruptly at the same spot. He slammed the fallboard down over the keys, making Eleanor jump. That's when he noticed her. "You there?" he called out, squinting into the dimness where she stood. "How long have you been here?" Eleanor straightened up, clutching her dust cloth. "I'm sorry, sir. I'm just finishing the morning cleaning. I can come back later." Victor waved a dismissive hand. No, stay if you must." He sounded annoyed but resigned. Opening the fallboard again, he returned to the troublesome passage, playing it slower this time, his concentration evident in his furrowed brow. Eleanor resumed her work, moving a row closer to the stage. She could see the strain in Victor's shoulders as he hunched over the keys, the frustration in each attempt at the difficult section. After the 5th try, Victor stood up abruptly, pacing the stage. "Impossible. This hall has terrible acoustics." He looked around and noticed Eleanor again, now only a few rows from the stage. "Are you enjoying the free concert?" he asked, his tone carrying a sharp edge. "The music is lovely, sir," Eleanor replied softly. "That difficult part, maybe it needs more feeling than speed." As soon as the words left her mouth, she regretted them. 15 years of invisibility broken by a thoughtless comment to one of the most renowned pianists in the world. Victor stared at her, his expression shifting from surprise to amusement. "Is that so?" He looked at her more carefully now, her worn uniform, the cleaning cart beside her, the dustcloth in her hands. "And what would a cleaning lady know about Rachmaninoff?" Before Eleanor could apologize or retreat, the backstage door opened again. 3 younger musicians entered, carrying instrument cases, early arrivals for morning rehearsal. They greeted Victor with deference, and he nodded distractedly, his eyes still on Eleanor. "Perfect timing," Victor said to the newcomers, a strange smile forming on his lips. "Our cleaning expert here was just about to give me advice on my interpretation of Rachmaninoff." The young musicians looked confused, glancing between the famous pianist and the older woman in the cleaning uniform. One of them, a young woman with a violin case, stifled a laugh. "Come here," Victor suddenly called to Eleanor, beckoning her toward the stage. Eleanor froze. This wasn't right. She should excuse herself, return to work, maintain the boundary between people like her and people like them. But something in his challenging gaze made her straighten her shoulders. She set down her dustcloth and walked down the center aisle toward the stage, feeling the eyes of the younger musicians on her. "What's your name?" Victor asked when she reached the edge of the stage. "Eleanor Williams." "Sir?" "Well, Eleanor Williams, since you have opinions on my playing, perhaps you'd like to demonstrate." He gestured to the piano bench with an exaggerated flourish. "Please show us how it should be done." One of the young men snickered. The violinist looked embarrassed but remained silent. Eleanor's heart pounded in her chest. She knew he was mocking her, using her to break his own tension and frustration. She should refuse, walk away, protect herself from becoming the punchline of their morning joke. But the piano gleamed under the stage lights, beautiful and tempting. How many times had she imagined sitting there when the hall was empty? How many times had her fingers itched to touch those keys? "I don't think that would be appropriate, sir," she said quietly. "Nonsense." Victor stepped back from the bench. "I insist. Consider it a break from your cleaning duties. Unless, of course, you were just talking without knowing." The challenge in his voice was unmistakable. Eleanor looked at the piano, then at the small audience watching this uncomfortable scene unfold. The younger musicians seemed unsure whether to be amused or uncomfortable. Victor's smile didn't reach his eyes. Time seemed to slow as Eleanor made her decision. With dignity that surprised even her, she climbed the small steps at the side of the stage. Her work shoes made soft sounds on the polished wood as she crossed to the piano, aware of how out of place she looked in her gray cleaning uniform. As she sat on the bench Victor had vacated, she caught a whiff of his expensive cologne. The keys before her were still warm from his playing. She placed her hands in her lap, suddenly overwhelmed by what she was about to do. "Well?" Victor prompted, crossing his arms. "The difficult passage begins at measure 76. Show us this feeling it supposedly needs." Eleanor looked up at the sheet music, Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 3, one of the most technically demanding pieces in the classical repertoire. She recognized it from hearing it practiced in this very hall over the years. But she had never seen the actual notation before. She stared at the complex arrangement of notes, aware of the impossibility of what she'd been challenged to do. She couldn't read music at this level. Few people could. Victor knew this. It was part of his joke, the final twist to ensure her humiliation was complete. The silence stretched uncomfortably. One of the young musicians shifted their weight, the sound of their shoe squeaking slightly on the floor. Eleanor's hands trembled slightly as she raised them to the keys. She wouldn't try to play the impossible piece before her, but she wouldn't leave this bench in shame either. Instead, her fingers found the opening notes of Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, a piece she knew by heart, a piece that lived in her hands and her memory. The gentle, dreamy melody filled the concert hall, her touch delicate but confident. The expressions on the faces watching her transformed from amusement to confusion to astonishment as she continued playing. The young violinist's mouth fell open. The other musicians exchanged glances of disbelief, but Eleanor saw none of this. Her eyes had closed, shutting out everything but the music flowing from her fingers. Each note carried years of silent practice, of dreams deferred, of a passion kept hidden from a world that had told her it wasn't her place. Victor Hartmann stood motionless at the side of the stage, his arms no longer crossed but hanging loosely at his sides, his face a mask of bewilderment. The morning light now streamed fully through the windows, catching the dust motes swirling in the air above the piano, creating a golden halo around the cleaning lady whose hidden talent was being revealed with each perfect note she played. And as the final gentle chords of the nocturne faded into silence, a new story was about to begin, one that would change every life in that concert hall in ways none of them could imagine. The silence that followed Eleanor's playing seemed to stretch for an eternity. No one moved. No one spoke. The final notes of Chopin's Nocturne lingered in the air like a question waiting to be answered. Eleanor's eyes remained closed for a moment longer, her hands now resting gently on her lap. When she finally looked up, she was met with 4 stunned faces staring back at her. The young violinist's bow hung limply at her side. One of the other musicians had dropped his sheet music, the pages scattered across the polished floor. Victor Hartmann stood frozen, his expression unreadable. The mockery that had been in his eyes minutes before had vanished, replaced by something Eleanor couldn't quite identify. Confusion? Disbelief? Perhaps even a touch of shame? She rose from the bench, suddenly aware of how out of place she looked in her gray cleaning uniform. "I should get back to work," she said quietly, her voice barely audible in the vast hall. "Wait." Victor's command stopped her as she turned to leave the stage. "Where did you learn to play like that?" Eleanor hesitated, her hands fidgeting with the fabric of her uniform. 15 years of blending into the background had become a habit hard to break. "I've picked things up here and there," she answered vaguely. "Picked things up?" Victor repeated, taking a step toward her. "That's not something you just pick up. That was Chopin played with the touch of someone who understands his soul." His voice had lost its earlier condescension. Replaced by genuine curiosity, the young violinist had recovered enough to speak. "It was beautiful," she offered, her earlier amusement completely gone. Victor waved away the comment, his focus entirely on Eleanor. "That's not what I asked." He moved closer, studying her face as if seeing her for the first time. "Who are you, really?" Eleanor felt a flush rising to her cheeks. This attention was uncomfortable, unwanted. She had spent decades being invisible, and now all eyes were on her, waiting for an explanation she wasn't sure she wanted to give. "I'm just the morning cleaner, Mr. Hartmann, and I really should finish before Mr. Reynolds arrives." She stepped back, creating distance between herself and the famous pianist. Victor shook his head. "No, not anymore. Not after what we just heard." He gestured to the piano. "Play something else." It wasn't a request, it was a challenge. The younger musicians exchanged glances, clearly uncomfortable with the tension building on stage, but too curious about the mysterious cleaning lady to intervene. "I don't think," Eleanor began. "Something more difficult," Victor interrupted. "Bach, perhaps? Or more Rachmaninoff, since you seem to have opinions on how it should be played." There was an edge to his voice now, not cruel but insistent. Eleanor looked longingly toward her cleaning cart sitting abandoned in the aisle. This wasn't how her morning was supposed to go. She'd made a mistake letting them see this side of her. Nothing good ever came from stepping out of your assigned place. She'd learned that lesson the hard way decades ago. "Please," added the violinist, her voice gentler than Victor's. "We'd love to hear more." Eleanor sighed. Perhaps it was better to get this over with, to satisfy their curiosity so they would let her return to her invisible life. She sat down once more at the piano bench and placed her weathered hands on the keys. This time she chose Bach's Prelude in C major from the Well-Tempered Clavier. The piece began simply enough, but its intricacies demanded precision and understanding. Her fingers moved confidently, finding each note with practiced ease despite years without proper instruction. Victor moved to stand beside the piano, watching her hands with intense focus. Halfway through the piece, he held up his hand. "Stop!" Eleanor's fingers froze mid-phrase. Had she made a mistake? Was this the moment he'd mock her again? Instead, Victor reached over and turned the sheet music on the stand to Rachmaninoff's concerto, the very piece he'd been struggling with earlier. "Start at measure 76, he instructed, pointing to the passage that had frustrated him. Eleanor looked at the complex notation and shook her head. "I can't read music like this." Not at sight. The admission hung in the air. The younger musicians looked confused, glancing between Eleanor and the piano as if trying to solve a puzzle. "You can't read music," Victor repeated slowly, "yet you just played Chopin and Bach from memory with that level of interpretation." His eyes narrowed. How is that possible? Eleanor's hands fell back to her lap. "I hear things. I remember them." It was a simplification of a gift she'd spent a lifetime downplaying. Victor wasn't satisfied. No one just remembers pieces that complex without training, without years of study. He crossed his arms. "I think there's quite a story here, Mrs. Williams." "Ms.," she corrected automatically. And it's not much of a story. By now, more musicians had begun to arrive for the morning rehearsal. They paused at the back of the hall, watching the unusual scene unfolding on stage. Their star soloist engaged in intense conversation with a cleaning lady seated at the grand piano. "Play something you've heard recently in this hall," Victor said suddenly. Something performed in the last month. Eleanor recognized this for what it was. Another test, another challenge. Part of her wanted to refuse, to walk away and protect the private world she'd built for herself. But another part, a part long suppressed, felt something awakening. The joy of being heard after decades of silence was more powerful than she'd expected. She thought for a moment, then began to play Debussy's Clair de Lune, which had been performed just last week by a visiting French pianist. The dreamlike quality of the piece filled the hall, drawing in the newly arrived musicians who quietly took seats to listen. Victor watched her face as she played, noting how her expression transformed, years seeming to fall away as she lost herself in the music. When she finished, the small crowd that had gathered burst into spontaneous applause. Eleanor startled at the sound, suddenly aware that her audience had grown. Her hands trembled slightly as she stood up, uncomfortable with the attention. "Who taught you?" Victor asked, his voice lower now, genuine respect evident in his tone. "You must have had a remarkable teacher." Eleanor looked down at her hands, hands that had scrubbed floors and polished furniture for decades, yet somehow remembered the touch and feel of a piano she rarely had the opportunity to play. "My grandmother taught me when I was little," she said finally. "She cleaned houses for wealthy families. One of them had a piano they let her play when they weren't home. She'd take me with her sometimes, show me what she knew. And after that," Victor pressed. Eleanor shrugged. "Life happens. Some dreams don't fit in the world you're born into." The honesty of her words silenced Victor momentarily. The younger musicians looked away, suddenly aware they were witnessing something private. The backstage door opened again, and Mr. Reynolds, the hall manager, walked in holding his clipboard. He stopped short at the sight of Eleanor on stage with Victor Hartman. "Ms. Williams, is everything all right?" he called out, confusion evident in his voice. "Everything's fine, Reynolds," Victor answered before Eleanor could speak. "We've just been having a most interesting musical discussion." He turned back to Eleanor. "You never had formal training? Never attended a conservatory?" Eleanor felt Mr. Reynolds' concerned gaze. Her job suddenly felt precarious. "No, sir. Like I said, just things I picked up." She stepped away from the piano. "Mr. Reynolds, I'll finish the cleaning right away. I'm sorry for the delay." "Actually," Victor interrupted, "I was hoping Ms. Williams might assist me with something this morning." He gave the hall manager a smile that didn't invite questions. "You can send someone else to finish the cleaning." Mr. Reynolds looked bewildered but nodded. "Of course, Mr. Hartman, whatever you need." He retreated backstage, throwing one last confused glance at Eleanor. "I don't need any assistance," Eleanor said once Reynolds was gone. "And I need my job." "Your job is safe," Victor assured her. "But I have questions, and I think you have answers that might interest me." He gestured to the now crowded hall. "Perhaps somewhere more private." The orchestra members had begun setting up for rehearsal, stealing curious glances at the famous pianist and the cleaning lady who had somehow captured his attention. Eleanor felt trapped. This man had the power to complicate her carefully constructed life with just a few words to her employer. Yet something about his genuine interest in her playing made her hesitate to simply walk away. "The green room should be empty," she suggested reluctantly. Victor nodded and led the way backstage, leaving the curious musicians behind. In the small, comfortably furnished room where performers waited before concerts, Eleanor stood awkwardly while Victor closed the door. "Sit, please," he said, indicating a plush sofa. Eleanor perched on the edge of the seat, her back straight, her hands folded in her lap. Victor chose an armchair across from her. "I owe you an apology," he began, surprising her. "What I did out there was discourteous and unprofessional. I was frustrated with my own playing and took it out on you." Eleanor nodded slightly but said nothing. "But," Victor continued, leaning forward, "I'm not sorry it happened. Because otherwise I might never have discovered one of the most natural pianists I've heard in years. Hiding in plain sight." His eyes were intense, searching her face. "Now I want the real story, Eleanor Williams. Not the abbreviated version. How does a woman with your gift end up cleaning concert halls instead of performing in them? Eleanor looked down at her hands. Hands that knew both the smooth ivory of piano keys and the rough texture of cleaning brushes. For the first time in many years, someone was asking about the path not taken, the dream deferred. The question hung between them, and Eleanor realized that whatever she chose to reveal now might change everything. Eleanor took a deep breath, the plush sofa in the green room feeling foreign beneath her. Usually she only entered this room to vacuum and dust, never to sit, never to be listened to. It's not a special story, she began, her voice soft but steady. Happens to lots of folks who look like me and come from where I come from. Victor leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. The arrogance that had surrounded him earlier had faded, replaced by genuine curiosity. Tell me anyway. Eleanor's gaze drifted to the wall of photographs, famous musicians who had performed at Westfield Concert Hall over the decades. All those faces smiling out from their frames had followed paths that had been closed to her. I was born in Pine Hill, she said, small town in Georgia. My grandmother raised me after my mama passed. Like I told you, she cleaned houses for wealthy white families in the better part of town. Eleanor's hands twisted in her lap as the memories surfaced. One family, the Prestons. They had this beautiful Steinway in their front room. Mrs. Preston noticed Grandma looking at it one day and asked if she played. When Grandma said yes, Mrs. Preston told her she could practice on it while the family was out, as long as everything got cleaned too. Victor nodded, encouraging her to continue. Grandma had learned from her church organist as a girl. Nothing formal, but she had a gift for it. She started taking me along to the Prestons when I was about 5. She'd set me on her lap and guide my hands over the keys. A small smile touched Eleanor's lips. By the time I was 8, I was playing better than her. Mrs. Preston heard me one day when she came home early. After that, she'd sometimes ask me to play when they had guests over. Like a performer? Victor asked. Eleanor's smile faded. No, like a curiosity. Look at our cleaning lady's granddaughter. Isn't it something? And they'd pat my head and give me candy afterward. She straightened her uniform skirt. But Mrs. Preston did give me my first book of sheet music. Taught me the basics of reading notes. But you said you can't read complex music, Victor interjected. I can read simple pieces, but mostly I play by ear. Always could. Hear something once or twice and my fingers just find the notes. She shrugged as if this extraordinary gift was nothing special. Anyway, when I was 11, my 5th grade teacher heard me playing at a church function and told my grandmother I had rare talent. Said I should audition for a special music program in Atlanta. Victor's eyebrows rose. Did you? Eleanor nodded. Grandma took 3 buses to get me there. I played Mozart. Taught myself from a record we borrowed from the library. The judges were shocked. They accepted me right away, offered a full scholarship. So you went? For a while. Eleanor's voice grew quieter. It was 1962. I was the only colored child in the program. The other students' parents complained. The teachers kept finding reasons why I was falling behind, even though I could play circles around most of those kids. Understanding dawned on Victor's face. They pushed you out. They suggested I might be more comfortable elsewhere. Said the program was too demanding alongside regular schoolwork. Eleanor's bitter laugh held decades of disappointment. Grandma knew what they really meant. But she didn't have the means to fight it, and there was no one to stand up for us back then. Victor stood up and paced the small room. But after that? Surely there were other opportunities as you got older. Eleanor shook her head.
Life takes over, Mr. Hartman. Grandma got sick my junior year of high school.
I took over her cleaning jobs. Then I got married at 19 to a good man who worked at the paper mill. Had my boy a year later. Her eyes softened at the mention of her child. Tommy's 42 now, works as an electrician in Charlotte. But the music? Victor pressed. How could you just give it up? Something flashed in Eleanor's eyes, a brief spark of the fire that must have burned brighter in her youth. Who says I gave it up? I've played every chance I got. Church on Sundays, the old upright piano at the community center. And here, she gestured to the concert hall beyond the green room door, when no one's around. For 15 years, you've been cleaning this hall, listening to world-class pianists, and playing when no one's looking. Victor shook his head in disbelief. Don't you ever wonder what might have been? Wondering doesn't pay the bills, Mr. Hartman. Eleanor stood up. And speaking of bills, I should get back to work before Mr. Reynolds decides he needs someone more reliable. Victor stepped in front of her. Wait, just one more question. Your husband, where is he now? Eleanor's face revealed nothing. Richard passed 12 years ago. Heart attack? I'm sorry, Victor said, and he seemed to mean it. Do you still have a piano at home? Couldn't afford to keep the one Richard bought me after Tommy moved out. Had to sell it to fix the roof 3 winters back. She straightened her shoulders. Now, if you'll excuse me. But Victor wasn't ready to end the conversation. What if you could play again, on a proper piano whenever you wanted? Eleanor gave him a tired smile. That's a nice thought, Mr. Hartman. No, I'm serious. The music department at the university has practice rooms. I could arrange for you to have access. Or, his eyes lit up with a new idea. You could use the piano here after hours. I'm sure Reynolds would agree if I asked. Eleanor studied the famous pianist, trying to understand his sudden interest in her. Why would you do that? Victor ran a hand through his silver-streaked hair, seeming genuinely perplexed by her question. Because talent like yours shouldn't be wasted. Because music matters. Because, he hesitated, because I was unforgivably rude to you. And this might begin to make amends. Before Eleanor could respond, the door to the green room opened and the young violinist from earlier peeked in. Mr. Hartman, the conductor's asking for you. Rehearsal's about to begin, Victor nodded. Tell him I'll be right there. When they were alone again, he turned back to Eleanor. Will you at least think about it? Eleanor didn't answer directly. You should go, Mr. Hartman. They're waiting for you. He looked like he wanted to say more, but simply nodded and headed for the door. With his hand on the knob, he paused. I have another question, if you don't mind. Eleanor waited. That passage of Rachmaninoff I was struggling with this morning. What did you mean when you said it needed more feeling than speed? Eleanor hesitated, unused to having her opinions on music taken seriously. Just that, sometimes when a piece is technically difficult, players focus so much on getting all the notes right that they forget what the music is trying to say. That passage, it's like someone pleading, not showing off. Victor stared at her for a long moment. You understand this music in your bones, don't you? Without anyone ever teaching you the theory behind it. Eleanor looked away, uncomfortable with his intensity. I should go. Will you be here tomorrow morning? Victor asked suddenly. For your cleaning shift? Every weekday, 5 a.m. to noon, she replied. Good. This conversation isn't finished. With that, Victor left, the door closing softly behind him. Eleanor stood alone in the green room, surrounded by photographs of musicians whose names were known worldwide. Her heart was beating too fast, her mind racing with thoughts she hadn't allowed herself to entertain in decades. When she finally left the green room, she noticed the concert hall was now filled with orchestra members rehearsing. Victor sat at the grand piano, his focus on the conductor. But as Eleanor slipped along the side wall toward her abandoned cleaning cart, his eyes found her, and he gave her a small nod. She quickly gathered her supplies and moved to another section of the building to finish her work. As she cleaned, she hummed the Rachmaninoff passage Victor had been struggling with, her mind reinterpreting it the way she would have played it, with longing and emotion rather than technical brilliance. By the time Eleanor clocked out that afternoon, the story of the cleaning lady who had stunned Victor Hartman with her playing had spread through the entire concert hall staff. The young violinist had told her stand partner, who told the oboist, who told the stagehand, and so on until everyone was whispering about it. Eleanor kept her head down as she left, ignoring the curious glances and whispers that followed her. This attention was exactly what she had avoided for years, the reason she'd kept her talent hidden, playing only when no one could hear. As she waited at the bus stop outside, she wondered if she should call in sick tomorrow, perhaps even look for another job. The thought of facing Victor Hartman again made her stomach twist with anxiety. He had seen something in her that she had carefully hidden away, and now that it was exposed, she wasn't sure what would happen next. The afternoon sun was warm on her face as the bus approached. Eleanor Williams, cleaning lady and secret pianist, stepped aboard, unsure if her life had just been derailed or if, after 62 years, it was finally about to begin. Eleanor didn't call in sick the next morning. Despite the knot of anxiety that had kept her awake most of the night, she arrived at Westfield Concert Hall at her usual time, 5 a.m. sharp. The building was dark and silent as she unlocked the service entrance and wheeled her cleaning cart inside. For an hour, she worked in peaceful solitude, the familiar routine of dusting and polishing bringing comfort after yesterday's unsettling events. She deliberately saved the main concert hall for last, hoping to finish quickly and be gone before any musicians arrived for early practice. But as she pushed her cart down the center aisle toward the stage, she noticed something on the piano bench. Drawing closer, she saw it was a folder of sheet music with a note attached. With a sense of foreboding, she picked it up. "Eleanor," the note read in elegant handwriting, "I thought about what you said regarding the Rachmaninoff passage. I've marked some sections I'd like your thoughts on. I'll arrive at 7:30. Victor Hartman." Eleanor checked her watch. 6:45 a.m. Her first impulse was to leave the music untouched, finish her cleaning and disappear before 7:30. Yet curiosity pulled at her. She set down her cleaning supplies and opened the folder. Inside was the full score of Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 3. Victor had marked several passages with small pencil notes in the margins, including the troublesome section from yesterday. "Pleading, not showing off," he had written next to it, echoing her words. Eleanor glanced around the empty hall, then sat at the piano bench. She ran her fingers lightly over the keys without pressing them down, imagining the music in her head. Then, setting the marked score on the stand, she began to play the passage Victor had been struggling with. She played it softly, mindful of the early hour, but with all the emotion she felt the piece demanded. In her interpretation, the technically difficult runs became cries of longing, not displays of virtuosity. She lost herself in the music, forgetting for a moment about yesterday's embarrassment and today's anxiety. That's exactly what I was missing. Eleanor's hands froze on the keys. Victor Hartman stood at the edge of the stage watching her with intense focus. He wore casual clothes today, dark jeans and a gray sweater, so different from yesterday's formal concert attire. "You're early," Eleanor said, quickly standing from the bench. "So are you. At the piano, I mean." Victor came closer. "Don't stop on my account." Eleanor shook her head. "I was just curious about your notes, and I should get back to work." She reached for her cleaning cloth, but Victor's next words stopped her. "I listened to recordings of myself playing that passage until midnight," he said. "Then I tried your way, feeling over speed. It transformed the entire piece." He smiled, a genuine smile without the arrogance she'd seen yesterday. "You have a remarkable gift for interpretation, Eleanor. Not just technical skill, but true understanding." Eleanor didn't know how to respond to such praise from a world-renowned pianist. "I need to finish the stage area," she said finally. Victor sighed but stepped back. "Of course, I didn't mean to interrupt your work." He moved to a seat in the front row, watching as she quickly dusted the piano and polished the floor around it. "Have you thought about what I suggested yesterday? About using a practice room?" Eleanor wiped down the conductor's stand, keeping her eyes on her task. "Mr. Hartman, I appreciate your interest, but I'm not sure what you're hoping for here. I'm 62 years old. I clean this building for a living. Whatever talent I might have doesn't change those facts. Age is irrelevant to music," Victor countered, "and jobs can change." That made Eleanor stop and look at him. "What are you saying?" Victor leaned forward in his seat. "I'm saying that what I heard yesterday was exceptional. I've been playing professionally for 40 years, taught at conservatories across Europe and America. I know talent when I hear it, and," Eleanor prompted, suddenly wary, "and I'd like to help you develop it." "It's not too late." Eleanor laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Develop it for what?" "I'm not going to become a concert pianist at my age." "Why not?" Victor challenged. Glenn Gould was performing into his 50s. Arthur Rubinstein gave concerts in his 90s. Those men had lifetimes of training and careers, Eleanor pointed out. "I've never even owned a proper piano." Victor stood up and approached the stage again. "Eleanor, do you know why I was so frustrated yesterday morning? Why I lashed out at you?" She shook her head. "Because despite all my training, all my technical skill, sometimes the music still feels beyond my reach. The notes are right, but the soul is missing." He gestured to the piano. "Then you sit down with no formal training and immediately find what I've been searching for." Eleanor's heart beat faster at his words. "So this is about you? You want to learn something from me?" Victor considered this. "Perhaps it is partly, but it's also about music. About not letting a gift like yours go unshared with the world. He held her gaze. Will you play something for me now? Not Chopin or Bach this time. Something of your own interpretation. Eleanor glanced at her watch. Other staff would be arriving soon. I really need to finish, please, Victor said, and there was nothing commanding in his tone now. Just a simple request from one musician to another. Against her better judgment, Eleanor sat at the piano again. This time she chose a piece she'd loved since childhood, Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata. But she played it her way, with subtle changes in tempo and emphasis that made it uniquely hers. As the final notes faded, she heard a soft sound from the back of the hall, applause. She turned to see Mr. Reynolds, the hall manager, standing in the aisle with his morning coffee. His face showed surprise, but also something else, respect. I didn't know you played, Ms. Williams, he said, walking toward the stage. Before Eleanor could respond, Victor spoke up. Mr. Reynolds, I'd like to request something unusual. I want Ms. Williams to assist me with my rehearsals this week. Her musical insight has been invaluable. Reynolds looked confused. You want our cleaning lady to help you rehearse? I do, Victor confirmed. I'll speak to the director about compensating her time, of course. Eleanor stood up, flustered. Mr. Hartman, this isn't necessary. It is to me, Victor insisted. He turned back to Reynolds. Well? The hall manager shifted uncomfortably. I suppose we could arrange for someone else to cover her cleaning duties this week. If that's what you really want. It is, Reynolds nodded, still looking bewildered, then continued to his office, glancing back once as if to confirm he hadn't imagined the scene. When he was gone, Eleanor turned to Victor. What are you doing? I can't advise you on your playing. That's ridiculous, is it? Victor raised an eyebrow. You've already improved my interpretation of Rachmaninoff with one comment. Imagine what might happen if you actually had time to listen and respond without worrying about finishing your cleaning rounds. Eleanor shook her head. People will talk. They'll think it's strange. People always talk, Victor replied with a dismissive wave. Let them. I care about the music, not gossip. For the first time since their unusual relationship began, Eleanor felt a glimmer of excitement breaking through her caution. The idea of spending days focused on music instead of cleaning was almost too wonderful to contemplate. What would I even do? She asked. Listen, share your thoughts. Play when I ask you to. Be honest with me about what you hear. Victor grinned suddenly. And maybe teach me how to find the soul in the notes the way you do. Eleanor was about to respond when the backstage door opened and orchestra members began filtering in for morning rehearsal. They paused when they saw Eleanor at the piano with Victor, whispering among themselves. The young violinist from yesterday approached. Good morning, Mr. Hartman. She nodded politely to Eleanor. Ms. Williams. The simple acknowledgement, so different from the way most musicians looked through her as if she were invisible, caught Eleanor by surprise. Good morning, Victor replied. I was just telling Ms. Williams that she'll be joining our rehearsals this week as a special consultant. The violinist's eyes widened slightly, but she simply nodded. Wonderful. I look forward to it. She continued to her seat, leaving Eleanor to wonder how quickly this news would spread through the orchestra. Victor turned back to Eleanor. So, will you do it? Eleanor thought of her small apartment, her solitary evenings, her decades of playing in secret. She thought of her grandmother who had given her the gift of music despite having so little herself. She thought of all the years spent listening to others perform in this hall while she remained in the shadows. Yes, she said finally, but I have conditions. Victor looked surprised but nodded. Name them. I want to keep my job here. No matter what happens this week, I need to know my position is secure. Eleanor straightened her shoulders. And I don't want any charity. If I'm going to do this, I need to be treated like any other musical consultant you might hire. Agreed, Victor said without hesitation. Anything else? Eleanor took a deep breath. Yes, I want honesty. If this is just some passing curiosity for you, or if you're doing this out of guilt or pity, tell me now. I've spent my life being practical, Mr. Hartman. I can't afford dreams at my age. Victor held her gaze steadily. This is about music, Eleanor. The one thing in this world that has always mattered most to me. I don't offer my time or attention lightly, and I never mix music with pity. He extended his hand. Do we have an agreement? After a moment's hesitation, Eleanor shook his hand, feeling as though she had just stepped off a cliff with no idea what waited below. We do. And so began the most extraordinary week of Eleanor Williams' life, a week that would change everything. The grand piano gleamed under the spotlight, its polished surface reflecting the warm glow of the concert hall. Eleanor sat in the front row, hands folded tightly in her lap, watching as the audience filed in for Victor Hartmann's sold-out performance. She wore a simple navy blue dress, new, bought specially for this evening, so different from the gray uniform she'd worn in this same hall for 15 years. 1 week had passed since Victor had asked her to be his consultant. One extraordinary week that had changed everything. The first day had been awkward. Orchestra members had stared as Eleanor sat beside Victor at the piano, whispering suggestions about phrasing and emotion. The conductor had raised his eyebrows skeptically when Victor explained her role. But by the end of that first rehearsal, when Eleanor's insights had transformed a troublesome passage of Rachmaninoff from technically impressive to genuinely moving, the skepticism had begun to fade. By the third day, musicians were seeking her out during breaks, asking her thoughts on their own parts. "You hear things differently," the young violinist had told her. "You make us remember why we fell in love with music in the first place." Each evening that week after the orchestra had gone home, Victor had insisted Eleanor stay. They'd sat side by side at the piano for hours, playing duets, discussing interpretations, sharing stories. Victor told her about his childhood in Vienna, his demanding father, the loneliness of touring. Eleanor spoke of her grandmother, of dreams abandoned, of a life spent watching others live the career she might have had. "It's never too late," Victor had said on the fourth night, after hearing her play a particularly complex Liszt piece. "Not with a gift like yours." Now as the lights dimmed and the audience quieted, Eleanor felt her heart racing. Tonight's concert was the culmination of their week together. Victor had been adamant that Eleanor's influence had transformed his playing, had helped him rediscover the emotional core of the music he'd been performing for decades. The hall manager, Mr. Reynolds, slipped into the seat beside her. "Nervous?" he asked kindly. Their relationship had shifted dramatically this week, from employer and cleaner to something approaching colleagues. "A little," she admitted. "Don't be. What you two have accomplished this week is remarkable." He patted her hand awkwardly. "By the way, your new work schedule has been approved. 3 days cleaning, 2 days in the music education department." Eleanor nodded, still hardly believing the arrangement Victor had orchestrated. Starting next week, she would split her time, keeping her cleaning job but also helping with the hall's community outreach programs, teaching piano to children from low-income neighborhoods. The audience applauded as the conductor appeared, followed by the orchestra. When Victor walked on stage, his silver-streaked hair gleaming under the lights, the applause grew louder. He took his position at the piano, but before sitting, he scanned the front row. When his eyes found Eleanor, he gave her a small nod, a private acknowledgement. The music began. Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 3, the very piece he'd been struggling with when they first met. From the opening notes, Eleanor could hear the difference. Victor played with technical brilliance, as always, but now there was something more, a depth of feeling, a soulfulness that hadn't been there before. When he reached the passage they'd worked on most intensely, Eleanor found herself holding her breath. Victor's fingers danced across the keys, finding not just the notes but the emotion behind them. The pleading quality she'd described was there, perfectly expressed. Halfway through the performance, Eleanor became aware of a dampness on her cheeks. She was crying silently, overwhelmed by the beauty of the music and by the knowledge that she had contributed to it in some small way. When the final notes sounded and the audience burst into thunderous applause, Victor stood to take his bows. The standing ovation lasted nearly 5 minutes. Eleanor clapped until her hands hurt, pride swelling in her chest. As the applause finally quieted, Victor gestured to the conductor, who nodded. Victor stepped to the edge of the stage. "Thank you for your kindness this evening," he addressed the audience. "Before our encore, I'd like to share something with you. This past week has been transformative for me as an artist, thanks to an extraordinary person who reminded me what music is truly about." Eleanor froze as Victor's gaze fell directly on her. Sometimes we find wisdom and talent in unexpected places. Sometimes we're too blinded by our own preconceptions to recognize greatness when it stands before us. Victor extended his hand toward the front row. "Eleanor Williams, would you please join me on stage?" A spotlight found her, and Eleanor felt the weight of hundreds of eyes turning in her direction. Mr. Reynolds whispered, "Go on," and gently nudged her. On trembling legs, Eleanor stood. The audience, confused but intrigued, applauded politely as she made her way to the steps at the side of the stage. Victor met her there, taking her hand to guide her to the piano. "Ladies and gentlemen," he continued, "Ms. Williams has been a cleaning staff member at this concert hall for 15 years. She has also been, unknown to us all, one of the most naturally gifted pianists I have ever encountered." Murmurs of surprise rippled through the audience. "Tonight, with her permission, I'd like to share her gift with you." He turned to Eleanor. "Would you play something for us? Perhaps the Chopin piece you first played for me?" Eleanor looked out at the sea of faces, wealthy patrons in evening wear, critics with their notepads, music lovers who had paid top dollar for their seats, all now staring at her, the cleaning lady with curiosity and confusion. For a moment, panic threatened to overwhelm her. Then she felt Victor's hand on her shoulder, grounding her. "You can do this," he said quietly, "just like when you play alone. The music is already in you." Eleanor took a deep breath and sat at the bench. The same piano she had dusted every morning for 15 years now awaited her touch as a performer. She placed her hands on the keys, closed her eyes briefly, and began to play. Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major filled the concert hall. Eleanor played not for the audience but for herself, for her grandmother, for the child she had once been who dreamed of moments like this. Her fingers found each note with the certainty that comes from a lifetime of holding music in your heart, even when you can't play it aloud. As the final gentle chords faded, there was a moment of complete silence. Then, like a wave crashing, applause erupted, tentative at first, then building to a roar. People rose to their feet, some wiping away tears, others shaking their heads in disbelief. Victor stepped forward again, his face alight with satisfaction. "Miss Williams will be joining our community music program as an instructor, but I believe her talents deserve a wider audience." He looked at Eleanor. "With her permission, I'd like to announce that she will be giving her first formal recital here next month, with all proceeds going to music education for underprivileged youth." The audience applauded again. Eleanor looked at Victor in shock. This hadn't been part of their discussions. He raised an eyebrow, a question in his eyes. After a moment of consideration, she nodded slightly. Eleanor Williams, 62 years old, stood and took her first bow as a pianist. In the audience, she spotted the young violinist applauding wildly. Beside her was a middle-aged man whose features reminded Eleanor of her late husband, her son Tommy, whom Victor had tracked down and flown in as a surprise. As she left the stage, legs still shaking, Eleanor was met by Mr. Reynolds. "You've been hiding all these years," he said, shaking his head in wonder. "Not hiding," Eleanor corrected him gently. "Just waiting, though I didn't know what for until now." The following morning, Eleanor arrived at the concert hall at her usual time, 5 a.m., but instead of heading to the cleaning supply room, she went directly to the stage. The piano waited in the dim light, a faithful friend. She sat and began to play, not caring who might hear. No more hiding, no more waiting. At 62, Eleanor Williams had finally found her voice, and she would make every note count for all the years of silence. As the sun rose and light began streaming through the high windows of Westfield Concert Hall, a small group gathered in the back to listen. Early arriving staff, night security finishing their shifts, even Mr. Reynolds. They watched as the woman they had barely noticed for 15 years filled their world with extraordinary beauty. And in a hotel across town, Victor Hartman listened to a recording of last night's performance, smiling at how a chance encounter and a cruel joke had led to one of the most meaningful experiences of his career. Talent, he reflected, had never been rare, only the opportunities to nurture it. He picked up his phone and began making calls to colleagues at music schools across the country. Eleanor Williams had decades of music still inside her, and he was determined to ensure the world would hear every note.